Isn't Chanukah a beautiful time? What a beautiful holiday. How spiritual, how illuminating is the festival of Chanukah. Remember this, that the oil represents the soul of the Jew. Remember, oil is that substance which is able to infiltrate into every little nook and cranny, yet it still remains separate. It always separates from any other liquid. So the soul of the Jew is that power to be able to integrate, yet always remember who you are, to always identify, to always isolate without ever getting overwhelmed, without ever getting eroding its own value. So this oil represents the soul. The fire represents God. How does a soul connect with God? How does the oil connect with the fire? You need a wick. What's a wick in Hebrew? Ptila. Ptila is a wick in Hebrew. Ptila is the same exact letters as the word tefillah, which means prayer. Wick and prayer. Petila, tefillah is exactly the same word, because what is it that connects the soul? What is it that connects the soul with God Almighty, the oil with the fire? It's got to be through the power of prayer. But that is an incredible bridge between worlds. Mortal and immortal, finite and infinite actually have a point of contact. That's an incredible realization that we're able to actually come to, that a finite being is actually able to have a meeting, a conversation, an encounter with the infinite. I mean, think about it. I can't even meet the president. Well, maybe I could, but most people can't even meet the president if they wanted to. You can't even meet the president. You know, here we were holding our event a few weeks ago, our 13th annual Chabad Golf Classic, and we wanted to meet the president. I was standing right there, 50 yards from the president. And I wanted to tell him, listen, I want you to come to meet the hostage from Gaza that we brought for our event, an American citizen. I couldn't get close because they prevented me, the Secret Service and everything else were preventing me from getting too close. If that's true of two mortal beings, how much more so is it true of an immortal, almighty, powerful God? Who would even think that you could connect? Such is the message of Chanukah, that it takes a wick to be able to bridge between the soul and God, between the oil and the fire. Now, one more thing is necessary. It's not enough to just have a wick. You have to have a flame. You have to have a match. You have to have a spark. How do you make a spark? How do you ignite the wick? It's like the two Flintstones. You've got to have a crash. You've got to have friction. Friction is a good word. You need friction. Whether it's a match or something else, you need friction in order to ignite the fire. What's friction? Friction is the shattering of your ego. Because prayer alone, narcissistic prayer, is not enough to bridge that gap. God cannot tolerate narcissism and ego. In order to be able to experience an encounter with the divine, what you need to do is to be able to experience that friction, which is the shattering of your ego. Now, if you're enlightened and wise, then you can shatter your ego from within, which means that you inflect in prayer and you reflect upon your humility and your lowliness before Almighty God, and then you approach God with humility. But if you don't have that maturity, rather you're chatting away through prayer, and you're completely oblivious to the purpose of prayer, or perhaps you don't experience prayer at all, then God has no choice but to inflict friction upon you. When friction comes from the outside, when the shattering of the ego comes from the outside, it manifests in the form of a bankruptcy, God forbid, a problem at work, a problem in the relationship, a problem of health, a problem of anti-Semitism, and so on and so forth. This is what shatters our ego. And you'll notice that what happens when people experience a crisis, that's when they find their faith. Because it's the friction that inspires us to find our voice, tefillah, prayer, which is the petila, the wick that binds the soul, the oil, together with the fire, which is God. A beautiful metaphor to think about when you light your Chanukah lights tonight. But I want to expand it a little bit further. You know, there's a big debate in the Talmud about how to light the menorah. Why do we light lights? Why do we light candles? Anybody know? Because the oil burned. for 8 days. They only found enough oil to burn for 1 day, and the oil miraculously burned for 8 days. Why did they need to wait 8 days? We had this on television the other day. Because out of the 45-minute interview that we did with the TV, this is the few seconds that they took out. The reason is to make kosher oil takes 8 days. It's an 8-day process, and therefore they needed to be able to wait 8 days to be able to light the new lights. Problem was they only had oil for 1 day. So what did they do? They lit the oil for 1 day, and the oil miraculously lasted and burned for 8 full nights. And that's the reason why we light 8 lights of Chanukah, to remind us of the miracle of the burning of the oil for 8 nights. Now, there's a big debate about how we should experience the miracle of Chanukah. We know the way we do it is on the first night, we light 1 light. On the second night, we light 2 lights, and so on and so forth. We increase. But imagine, why are we doing one candle on the first night? Think about that. Why is there 1 candle on the first night? If we're celebrating the fact that the oil had the potential to burn for 8 days on the first day, the oil had power for 8 days, right? Think about it. The battery of the cell phone was charged 800%, right? On the second day, it was charged 700%. And on the third day, it was charged 600%. You see where I'm going with this? According to that thinking, on the first night, you should light all 8 lights. On the second night, you should light 7 lights. Third night, you should light 6, and so on and so forth. So that on the 8th day of Chanukah, when it only burned for 1 day, you should have only 1 light. What do you say to that? This is the opinion of Beit Shammai. Beit Shammai is onto something, Toby. Beit Shammai is absolutely onto something. It's a brilliant way of thinking. It's an absolutely brilliant way of thinking. Now, you can look at it 2 different ways. Beit Hillel looks at the actual amount of light of miracle experienced. Beit Shammai looks at the potential amount of miracle experienced. So Beit Hillel says, look, Hillel says, the house of Hillel, they're like, look, day 1, it's burned for 1 day. So we light 1 candle. Actually, it's burned 1 day. Shammai says, but that's got the potential for 8 days. So therefore, let it burn for 8. Right? So you see, it's 2 ways of looking at life. I dare you to look at your fellow Jew that way. Do you look at your fellow Jew as to what they've actually done? Or do you look at your fellow Jew as to what potential they bear? You know, the IRS once knocked on the door of Mr. Goldstein. And they said, Mr. Goldstein, is it true? Is it true that you're so generous? The local Chabad reported that you donated $2 million to charity last year. Is it true that you did so? So he thinks for a moment and he says, I will. He's got the potential to donate. He could have, he should have, he would have. But the question is, does that count? According to the lawyers, and that's what Toby's onto, the lawyers is that we don't go by potential, we go by actual. But it's important to take it into consideration, and I'd like to apply that to a deeper understanding of this debate, which is perpetuated within the Talmud for us to be able to appreciate why the Talmud shares this with us in a moment. Yeah.
Why wouldn't you, if it's the candles burn for 8 days? Why wouldn't you have 1 candle that burned for 8 days?
How are you going to get a candle? Get one of those long candles.
A candle that burns, excuse me, for 24
So you should get an 8-day candle.
It would be a massive candle, but why?
It burns for 7 days.
Okay, so why don't we do 1 candle? Very interesting question coming here.
Symbolic of.
Amy's in California. Regards, it's early in the morning there. Ooh.
Wouldn't that be more symbolic of?
So the question Chuck is asking, why don't we light one of those giant yahrzeit candles that's going to be able to
burn 8 days?
That's going to burn for 8 days, exactly. The reason is because what we're doing over here is that we are trying to commemorate the menorah in the temple, which had 7 candles. 7 candles, right? This is a very interesting question. I wanted to tell you this. The menorah in the temple had only 7 candles. There was 3 and 3 and 1 in the middle, right? Yet our menorah has 8 candles. What happened here? Obviously, the reason for the 8 is because of the miracle, right? But there's something else to be said about this. one might easily think, let's look at the sequence of events, right? The Jews come out of Egypt, they build the first temple, gets destroyed by the Babylonians. They move to Babylon, Iraq for a while. Iraq is then conquered by Iran, Persia. They move to Persia for a while. Persia now has the Purim story. And then the ruler of Persia, the Jewish king, sends the Jews back to build the second temple. During the second temple, the Greeks rise and they try to assimilate the Jewish people. Okay. What happens is they dominate over Jerusalem. They rule. They turn the temple into like some gymnasium, some theater, some whatever, right? And they turn it into some house of impurity and paganistic idolatry, some naked wrestling, what they used to do, right? And then celebrating the human body, right? They would celebrate Klippa. They would worship what they saw, superficiality. And now, after they obviously ban all the practices, they institute all the heretics to work in the temple as the employees of the temple. High priests now become Hellenist Jews, like people like Jason. Jason becomes like, it's like Rabbi Jessica McDonald, like running the the temple. This is obviously a corruption from the highest echelons. Now what happens is that for a while, the use of the temple has been idle. After a while of corruption in the temple, the Maccabees rise, the sons of Matisyahu, the Kohen Gadol. They rise up and they drive the Greeks out of the land, and then they rededicate the temple, which is the story of Chanukah. What's interesting is one might easily have thought that we are at a gross disadvantage to those who came before us, because in the temple is much holier than now when we're dealing with a contaminated temple. We used to have a temple lighting the menorah every day, and now we haven't lit the menorah in many months, maybe years. We haven't lit the menorah. Not only that, but the overwhelming majority of the Jewish people at the time of Chanukah had assimilated into the Hellenic Greek culture. They were enamored with Stanford and Columbia University. They were enamored with Harvard and with UPenn. These were their aspirations, not Abaye and Rava, Hillel and Shammai, not the Baal Shem Tov and the Vilna Gaon and King David and King Solomon. They were enamored by Socrates and Plato. They were enamored by Dante and the other thinkers of their times. These were the majority of the Jewish people would assimilate it. It's very, very likely that the Jewish people would have thought to themselves, this party is almost over. Judaism is almost reached its expiration date, and we came teetered near the brink at the Chanukah story. Yet here we find that instead of lighting the same amount of lights that they lit in the temple beforehand, they lit an extra light. Because there was a powerful message here to the Jewish people to say that even though you might think that you're at some sort of a spiritual disadvantage, nevertheless, because you have engaged with darkness and overcome it, your light is even greater than before. Give an example. Think of two normal people, graduate college, they start a family. One becomes an addict. Sex addict, drug addict, alcoholic, whatever. And now what happens is two normal people. One is now struggling with tremendous darkness. Let's say he has the courage to turn around his darkness. He has the courage to face his addiction. He has the courage to go to AA and to go through the recovery process. Now what happens to these two people 10 years later? Two people, no longer normal. One is normal, the other one is abnormal. The normal one is just living a normal life. He's got a normal marriage, normal parenting, and so on and so forth. But the recovering addict is going to be profoundly sensitized to other people. He's got to be profoundly sensitized to his own spirituality because he's discovered the dark basement of his soul where he knows that he was powerless to, what's the words? He was powerless to overcome, and he relied on a higher power. So his spirituality, his faith is going to be supercharged. So you see how what happens when you overcome darkness, when you overcome pain and suffering, then the light that follows the darkness is far greater than the light that is in and of itself. right? This is what King Solomon told us in his writings. The intensity of the light is the light that comes from darkness. The light that's born from darkness is far more intense than just ordinary light, right? We appreciate something only after we've not had it, right? When something's been taken away from you. I mean, think about a Gaza hostage who's freed. For us normal people, we wake up in the morning, we go out, make a coffee, move on with your day. But what do you think it feels like to be a Gaza hostage? I can't even relate. I make my coffee in the morning and I think about the hostages. I think about what happens if they want a coffee. If he wants a drink of water, I think to myself, I'm thirsty. Okay, so I have to schlep to the kitchen to give myself some water. But these guys, they need water, and like, God forbid, what is going on with these poor souls, right? Think about what happens when a hostage gets released. I mean, I can't imagine how they could ever just sort of move on with their lives and just get out of bed one day without being profoundly grateful for the freedom that they hopefully will very soon have, right? So when you have a light that follows the darkness, it's a far more intense light, and that's why we light the menorah 8 and not 7, because there's a greater light when you overcome the darkness, and one candle would simply not do it. You need 8 lights. You need a much greater light than you even had before. I want to make sure to address this other point, but go ahead, Jack. What's your question?
Just a question. If a soul from birth, is cherished and nourished and apparently healthy, but never really confronts its own darkness, can that soul raise to the greatest heights?
I'm trying to repeat the question. I want to make sure that I understand it. Can a soul that lives a normal life and never
cherished and attached, healthy parents,
healthy relationships, normal life, but never experience darkness?
Yes.
Can such a soul do what?
Attain the same pinnacle as someone who has overcome.
No. The Talmud tells us explicitly that the answer to your question, that the place where the Baal Teshuvah reaches, the place where the penitent reaches, is far higher than the place where the perfect Jew can reach. You're learning Tanya with me, right? The daily personal Tanya. So you'll notice the different kinds of Jews, the righteous Jew, the sinful Jew, and the struggling Jew, right? The place where the struggling Jew can reach is far higher than the perfect Jew. Why? Because the perfect Jew, because he's experienced challenge. It's like, I'll give you an example. If I asked you to push an 800-pound fridge right now, can you push it? 300 pounds, can you push it?
No.
You can push it. 100 pounds, can you push 100 pounds? Okay, push 100 pounds. Now, if I ask you to push my little phone here with 100 pounds, can you do it? 100 pounds of power, can you put into this? Can you put in 100 pounds into pushing my phone the same you'd push into the fridge? You can't, because it's only when there's an opposition force that you're able to bring out that power. When there's no opposing force, I can't push this watch with 100 pounds of force, because it's the opposition that brings it out in me. It's the darkness that brings out the light, the deeper light. It's the struggle that brings out the greatest strength. Remember the butterfly in the cocoon, right? Remember the butterfly. When the butterfly is coming out of its cocoon and it's sweating bullets to break free from this cocoon, and it doesn't know what it's doing, and you want to let it out. You want to do it a favor, and you want to open the cocoon with your hand so it can go out and fly. What's going to happen is you're going to kill the butterfly, because it's going to fall to the ground and it's going to die from starvation on the floor, because it will not be able to fly. It's the struggle of breaking free from the cocoon that is designed by God to pump the blood into the wings of the butterfly, so that it learns that stuff on its back is actually an appendage for flying. Otherwise, it won't pump the blood into its wings, and it will not know that they're even there. So it's the struggle itself that brings out the best in us. And this is an unbelievable concept that is consistent throughout all of Torah. And you'll often notice me teaching this idea, because it comes up everywhere in every facet of our lives, from the match of the Chanukah lights that I just described to Joseph's story and the mimer that we're learning, the discourse about lighting the candles after dark, right? Which is also about doing something about the setting of the sun, allowing it to shine its radiance. The concept is that, I hope I answered your question, that it's only when you've encountered darkness that you've been able to reach those greater heights. It's only when you jump onto the springboard and you fall below that you can rise higher. It's like saying two people trying to throw a stone. One pulls it into a catapult backwards. Regression leads to greater progression. And the other one just goes like this, like what's it called? A shot put, I think it's called in the Olympics. The shot put, you can throw it like this, right? But you're not pulling it back, right? The one who pulls it further back gets greater momentum, right? In the same way, when you've experienced troubles in your life, instead of feeling sorry for yourself and cursing God, say, I was chosen for a greater light. Don't define yourself by your darkness, define yourself by your subsequent light. Back to Beis Shammai and Beis Hillel, who are looking at how we are supposed to confront darkness in our lives. Beis Shammai and Beis Hillel, they look at an empty menorah, which has got 8 dark empty candles, right? They're looking at this menorah, the house of Shammai and the house of Hillel. So the house of Shammai says that the way to deal with darkness is by making sure that you avoid any darkness. There can be no darkness on the menorah. You start with 8 lights. 8 lights. You've got to make sure that you're avoiding evil, you're avoiding darkness at all costs. Hillel says that's not the way to do it. Hillel says that the way to do it is by one foot in front of the other. Not by avoiding, by repelling the negativity. It's by doing one good deed at a time. 1 candle today, 2 candles tomorrow, a slow progression. So for example, if you're, just to give an example, let's say you realize one day, you wake up one morning and you realize that you are not a very observant Jew. So what are you going to do if you're not an observant Jew? You wake up one day, you're 67 years old, and you realize that you've never put on tefillin in your entire life. And you don't even know a Torah from a cucumber. You don't know nothing. You don't know hamantash from a herring. You don't know nothing. So what are you going to do? There's 2 ways to deal with your ignorance, your darkness, your lack of engagement. One way is to go all out and make sure that there's no negativity in your life at all. So you have no sins. You make sure that you avoid all sins. No more pork, no more this, no more that, no more meat and milk, right? No more driving on Shabbos. You make sure there's no darkness in your life. That's the approach of Shammai, which says 8 lights in the menorah from the get-go. But Hillel is far more practical. Hillel says, no. It's all too intense. And if you take that approach, then just nuking the darkness, then there's going to be, what hope is there for people? You got to start 1 foot in front of the other. You wake up one day and you say, you know what, today let's lay tefillin. Today we'll lay tefillin. And tomorrow we'll lay tefillin and we'll learn a little Torah. And the next day we'll do tefillin and Torah and a little tzedakah too. Right? And that's how we're going to grow. By a little light dispels a disproportionate amount of darkness. And that's going to be the strategy. So which is the right approach? There are different viewpoints as to how to deal with negativity in your life. By the way, I just think that in AA, I think, if I'm not mistaken, they say that if you're dealing with addiction, you can't do this one step at a time business. Can't do it. You got to go cold turkey. You got to, if I'm not mistaken, you got to get off of the drug immediately. You got to check out the whatever addiction you have. You got to entirely go cold turkey for a while, and then you can start. In other words, you got to remove yourself away from the darkness entirely. That's the approach of Beit Shammai. That says 8 lights on the first night. There's no space for darkness in my life. Right? That's a very intense approach. I think it's very effective, and that's why I told you back to your point. Shammai's onto something when he says that you start with the 8 lights, and then the 7, and then the 6. He's just nuking the darkness. He's just negating any negativity, any toxicity from our life.
Yeah, but why would you diminish the light? Why don't you keep 8 lights, 8 nights?
It's a good question. It's a good question.
That's why I asked.
I'm not sure of the answer to that question. You know what? I'll tell you why. Because on the first night, you've already illuminated that light. So maybe the answer would be, Rob, that maybe that at the beginning of your journey you need to give full energy, but maybe it's not practical to be that consistent, to be all guns blazing every day of your life. So the first day of recognizing your struggle is you've got to go with your greatest firepower, and then you can slowly diminish it because you're reaching a state of equilibrium. So you don't need to be all guns blazing every day. It's not practical, right? You can't be driving in first gear down the highway every day, right? You drive in cruise, right, in 5th gear, right? So I'm not sure if you understand what I'm saying, because you don't drive manual cars in this country, right? We only drive automatic. In my country where I'm from, everybody drives manual. Point is that maybe that's the answer, perhaps. But I just want to finish by saying that base Hillel is very, very much more approachable. It's one foot in front of the other. I'm not keeping kosher yet, but it's okay. I'm laying tefillin today. But you got to keep on increasing your light. You can't say, so for the rest of my life, now I'm never going to keep kosher, and I'm only going to lay tefillin. No, you got to keep on increasing. So today, tomorrow, and the next day, you got to keep on growing your light. And this is how we deal with negativity. Yeah?
I have a question. Go ahead, John. So when we are the men in the arena, and each day we're living our lives, when the difficulty happens, even the tragedy, is there a way that we can see these things as a gift?
Of course. Is there a way for you to see the tragedies, the struggles, and the challenges in your life as a gift? If you're looking at it through English, the word crisis is a terrible thing. It's a negative experience. But in Hebrew, the word crisis is mashber, which is a birthing stool. If you speak Hebrew and you look at the crisis as a birthing stool, then you could look at a birthing stool as a place of pain, or you could look at the birthing stool as a place of new life. Isn't that a beautiful way to look at our challenges? And that's why I encourage you to learn Hebrew. Learn Hebrew. Increase, raise the bar. Yes, Mark.
When you were talking about potential versus actual accomplishments, isn't that like one of your main goals as a rabbi, to get us from our potential accomplishments to reach our actual accomplishments?
Absolutely. It's a blend of both. Yes, very nice. It's a blend of both. See, when I see a fellow Jew, I don't see their actual. Actually, there might be an agnostic or an atheist. Actually, there might be completely devoid of any mitzvahs. This is actually a true story. I was once at the Western Wall, laying tefillin with the Jews. There's a tefillin stand at the Western Wall, dozens of pairs of tefillin, and people come from everywhere. Of course, they come to Jerusalem, they come to the temple, and the Western Wall, and it's pretty low-hanging fruit at that point. If they're already there, it's not that difficult to get them to lay tefillin. So at one point, the guys that were working there, I went over to them. I was a young man, and I said, let me give you a break. I brought them some drinks. Have a break, go to the shade. I'll take you over for a little bit. So I'm standing over there, and a guy comes in, I don't know, I think he was from Hungary. He looked like, he didn't look very Jewish, let's say, maybe some tattoos and stuff. Yeah. So I asked him if he was Jewish. He said, yeah. We lay tefillin. At one point, there were these other young rabbinical students, not Chabad, young rabbinical students, and they looked at me and they were like, why would you lay tefillin with him? I'm like, why not? So they said, well, he doesn't look Jewish. So I said, who cares how he looks? Don't judge a book by its cover. And there are other groups of Jews that are far more superficial in how they perceive others, right? But in Chabad, I can tell you that we see straight through the soul. Tanya teaches us, Tanya chapter 32, that when you see another Jew, you got to see their soul. Tanya chapter 2, we just learned it in the Daily Tanya yesterday. In the Daily Tanya, and I encourage you please to join me on the Daily Tanya, the personal Tanya, every day, the game-changing insights of Tanya in 5 minutes or less. And that's on my YouTube, youtube.com/Jewish Gardens, youtube.com/Jewish Gardens. You can listen to it every day and fulfill the daily quota. We learned that the essence of a Jew is a piece of God. The essence of a Jew is infinity. So you cannot see the actual. You got to see deep down. Don't see the superficial marker. Look down and see the essence.
Rabbi,
yes, sir.
you're on a desert island, and the rescue boat was not coming for 8 days, and you had only enough water for 1 day. Would you drink all that water?
That's a great question. It's a great question.
Or would you say, I'm going to have 1/8 today and 1/8 tomorrow? So why did they burn all the lights the first day? Did they know there was going to be a miracle?
That's such a great question.
Just on one candle this day.
That's such a great question. The question, just to repeat for our YouTube viewers, is if you were stuck on a desert island and you knew somehow that the boat wasn't coming for 8 days, maybe you knew, and you only had water for 1 day, would you drink all the water in 1 day, or would you ration it out? It would make much more sense if there was some sort of an economist or like a tax attorney over there. Thank God there wasn't any. But if there was, they would have budgeted. Some bookkeeper, accountant, fat cat personality would have had make sure that they rationed it out over the days, which would have made basically 1/8 of the oil per day. The problem with that answer, with that proposal, Rob, is that you're not allowed to do anything in the temple half full. You're not allowed to do anything for God which is halfway. Everything you do for God, you got to give it all you got. In other words, the Kiddush cup has to be overflowing, and the oil has to be filled up to the very top. You can't serve God some sort of slim pickings. When you do exactly, yeah. You work with what you have, You work with what you have. And no, they did not know that there was going to be a miracle. And the amazing part of Chanukah, which what's so practical and relevant to us today, is that Chanukah was not a time of overt miracles. In fact, Chanukah was a very modern, secular culture, much like New York City, London, or Madrid today. There were these secular thinkers, and they were very popular. We weren't living in Moses or King David times. We were living in times of ordinary, modern. There was the Pantheon, there was the Colosseum, not the Colosseum yet, but there was the Greek buildings, and there was a tremendous amount of modern thinking, secular culture, just like today. And the beauty of the Chanukah story was that the hand of God was hidden. See, what the Jewish people did in the Chanukah story, and this part also made it onto television the other day, is that the Jewish people said, look, we don't have a plan for the end game, but we do know what we need to do right now. You can't write the beginning of your story, but you can write the end of it. So what they did was they said, look, we're going to proceed with faith, and God, your God, will bless you in all that you do. It's like having a child, for example. Having a child is an ultimate act of faith. Do you know that how the child is going to be health-wise, spiritual-wise? Do you know if they're going to give you grief to no end or nachas? Do you know if you'll be able to afford them? How do you know if you'll be able to afford to send this kid to school in 18 years from now? Will you be able to pay for a wedding in 20-something years? How do you know that? Having a child is the ultimate act of faith, right? Having a child, and I can tell you, even perhaps you could say the same thing about running a business. Here at the Chabad, we hire employees. How do you know you'll be able to provide for everybody? You have to have faith. And God, your God, will bless you in all that you do, right? So in much the same way, the Jewish people then exhibited that approach. They said, God, we're going to give you our very best offering today on day one. This is all we got, but we're going to give it our best shot. And then what happens is that the hand of God was miraculous. I just want you to think about, imagine you had a video camera. What happened when the Maccabees came into the temple on the second day? I just want you to think about that. When they came into the temple on the second morning, or the second night, really, because they lit it at night and it went for 24 hours. And now they're like, it's going to be dark in there. And they open the curtain and they're like, the candle's burning. And they look inside and they see it's still full. And they can't figure out what happened. And they have no choice but to conclude that the oil just didn't burn down last night. But the candle was on all night. And the same thing the third and the fourth and the fifth day. In other words, they were able to sense the presence of God in the rear view mirror, but not in actual real time. And I believe that's what's happening to us right now. Any time that Israel has made a deal with her enemies, it has backfired.
In a way, the Jews invited the miracle.
Let me just finish this point. And just hold that point there. Anytime the Jews have made a deal with their enemies, it has backfired and failed. Anytime the Jews have leaned on God, not waiting for approval or permission from America or from Europe or from Russia or from any other nudnik, but rather saying God Almighty has commanded us to defend ourselves and therefore we will, it's then that we see that the Jewish people have prospered. Think about this for a moment. The 60-minute interview the other day was edited about the beeper bombs. The unedited version was broadcast in certain places in Israel. The Mossad agent, there was a female Mossad agent who was on that interview. She was entirely cut out of the interview. But in her interview, in her words, she said that Bibi had to stand up to his chief of staff and his minister of defense, who both refused to launch the beeper bombs and also refused to take out Nasrallah, head of Hezbollah, because they wanted American approval first. That's what she said in this interview. They needed American approval first. And thank God that Bibi didn't wait to listen to their permission, to their instruction, and to wait for permission from America. Yeah, we think you should take out Hassan Nasrallah. Right? In fact, when they did take him out, and the Israeli party called his American counterpart, and he said, we just took out Nasrallah. He said, famously, his response was something like, "Excuse me, you did what?" Something like that. And there was like an interesting line expression of that, because we cannot live our lives in a way where we're leaning on others. We've got to be able to lean on God. That is the definition of faith, and that's what the Jewish people did today, did then, And I believe that's what the Jewish people are trying to do now. Think about this. How many times has it happened in the past 75 years of Israel's modern history that they've waited for permission from others, that they've leaned on international guarantees, and it's backfired? Just think about Hezbollah. Where did Hezbollah come from? Hezbollah came from a UN resolution 1701 that said that if Israel only withdraws from southern Lebanon, peace will reign in the region. United Nations will guarantee that there will be no weapons or militarization of southern Lebanon. It's going to be happily ever after. Yesterday, Israel displayed 85,000 weapons that they seized from Hezbollah, and that's the stuff that they didn't bomb. I mean, this is insane. What on earth are we thinking? Right? What on earth were we thinking? As long as the Jewish people are exhibiting the power to light the menorah lights on the first night and say, God, we're doing our part and we're counting on you. Whatever you want, but we're doing what we need to do, what we know that you want us to do, as opposed to what others are advising us to do. That's when the Jewish people prosper, when the Jewish people have the courage of their own convictions, not to need to get anybody else's permission, but to believe, to proceed with faith. That is what unleashes the Chanukah miracle.
Doesn't it show that God's hand was in it because it was 8 days and not 7? You know what I mean? Because 7 is like the worldly and 8 is beyond.
Yeah, so there's something Kabbalistic about what you're saying, Toby, that the number 7 is the cycle of nature, 7 days of the week, 7 notes of music, 7 colors of the rainbow, 7 isotopes, 7 definitions of the isotope. But then there's the number 8, which is a miraculous number. It's a number which is supernatural, 8 days of the covenant of the bris. 8 days of any miracle in the Torah, because the number 8 is supernatural. The manifestation of infinity mathematically is the number 8 on its side. Yeah, there is something to be said about that, but it's just beyond a little bit beyond this class. But yeah, there also is a reference, a hint to the presence of God, and the fact that there was number 8. They realized, I guess, in day 2 and 3, they were like, "Whoa, that's weird," and then 6, 7, 8. When they hit 8, they were like, "Oh." When it hits number 8, that's the number of supernatural. And 7 is natural. Number 8 is supernatural. They're like, oh, this is the hidden hand of God. Yes.
Isn't that's the same thing with Gaza, with Hamas? I mean, Israel gave up Gaza for 16 years, and then you see what happened.
Israel was in Gaza until 2005. Now, in 2005, Israel unilaterally withdrew from Gaza in order to gift the Palestinians with a state. The problem with the Palestinians is that they never wanted a state. In their charter, which remains unchanged to this day, from 1967 when they became invented until today, it still says that the charter of the Palestinians calls not for the establishment of a Palestinian state. It calls for the destruction of the Jewish state. They do not want their own state. They want the death of the Jewish state. So what happened was Israel said, you know what? We're just going to give you a state, whether you like it or not. And what did we get? Elections in Gaza. Free and fair elections, they said. And who did they vote in? They voted in some of the world's most ruthless, bloodthirsty murderers, rapists, and killers. So yes, the answer to your question is that once again, we thought, by the way, this is in direct violation of the Torah. To give away land in Israel is in direct violation of the Torah. You may remember what happened to Ariel Sharon just after he gave away that land. He soon fell into a coma and never recovered. But that was in direct violation of the Torah. So giving away land when we observe the Torah, when we follow what God wants us to do, that's when we experience miracles. When we violate the Torah, that's when we don't. Yes.
What you're really saying is what the Israelis did wasn't tactical; it was destiny.
When they did what?
When they killed Nasrallah and the beepers and all these other different things. I'm going to
say it wasn't tactical. I'm going to say it's miraculous.
That's what I'm saying.
Yeah.
It was destiny.
I don't think that anybody could have predicted that Israel would be able to take out Hezbollah the way that they did. And I think that was the hidden hand of God. That's exactly what I'm saying. In other words, when they had the courage to do what the Maccabees did, which is to go out and to light the oil without an end game plan. Remember, they kept on asking us, the world, what's the end game? The day after, they needed to know, what's the plan in the day after Gaza? I'd like to know what the American plan in Dresden or in Hiroshima and Nagasaki was for the day after. I'd like to see the memorandum, which said, the plan for the day after is X, Y, and Z. There was never a day after plan. That is an anti-Semitic ruse. That is a disguise for an anti-Semitic attack on the Jewish people. Nobody else needs a plan for the day after. Only the Jews need a plan for the day after. And this war is going to go down in history as the most humane war. It's going to make a huge problem for Western nations that are going to be held to the same standard that they held Israel to. And we all know that they're not going to stand by that standard, because you can always self-justify, and they'll explain why they are are different and they don't need to be held to that standard. Lots to talk about, lots to think about, but Chanukah miracles are happening by Yom HaMahem in those days. Bizman hazeh in these days. Over and out. Have a lovely day, folks.
Thank you.
Great class, Rabbi.